Namaste, good morning, and welcome to this LinkedIn Live organized by CIVOM for the occasion of celebrating International Youth Day. That, of course, is celebrated on 12th of August every year. And this year, CIVOM is delighted to be celebrating this occasion on 21st August to have a very broadened and very thoughtful discussion with people from diverse backgrounds, the icons that we know. So we have with us architect Vinit Nikumbh, the principal architect at Bricolage, Bombay, who has earned the reputation of designing Muso, the Museum of Solutions in Mumbai. And then we have Ms. Shrija Iyer, the founder and principal of Sparkling Minds Global in Bengaluru, an IGCSE school. And we also have Mr. Yogendra Patidar, who serves as a director of CIVOM. So yes, let's start the conversation. So this conversation will have four themes where we'll be placing very tough questions to our panelists, and they will have to come up with answers and how we go about the theme we have today. So let's start actually. So on the first theme we have the compliance trap versus spatial agency. Okay, so the context here is standard high school and college campuses are often built around surveillance and passive compliance, whereas informal learning environments, by contrast, invite curiosity, self-direction, and playful engagement. And the first question comes to Vinit in this regard. Drawing from your work in designing informal learning environments like Museum of Solutions, how do non-formal open spaces shatter the rigid compliance mindset of traditional classrooms? And what can formal institutions learn from how youth naturally explores informal spaces? All yours.
Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. So, in my experience, children love worlds. Like the idea of environments and world building is a very, very, very interesting idea for children, and when like a child has naturally his or her life evolves from smaller worlds. So the first world is always the child and the mother, then the child and his parents, and the house. That's the second world. The third world may be the road or the street they live on the building. And slowly as they grow, their worlds keep on expanding. Like Disneyland is a world that Walt Disney created. Okay, or all the cartoons that they see on TV are environments. So when we try and work with children and we do a lot of experiential and narrative spaces, we try to create worlds, so they enter. So there is always like how you enter a temple. So there's like a bell you ring, or like, so there's a portal, right? And then you are in that world. So I find that children are like, school is a world that they inhabit for 8 hours a day, 6 hours a day. There are classrooms, or there are tuition classes, or there are, so like, playground is another world. So in the act of designing spaces, I think the most important thing is not the column, the beam, the building. It's actually world building. Okay. And it doesn't matter, like, so a lot of these formal or informal spaces, they focus more on whether it should be an RCC building or whatever. I think it should be a flexible environment that allows world building. And world building is not very complex, like a few charts on the walls, a little bit of paint, and few benches, and you can build a world. And children are amazing at building worlds. You give them a sari, they'll build a tent and they'll create their own world. People think that world building requires interior designers, architects with like plans and then furniture. So it doesn't matter. Children are like amazing creators of their own. So I think formal institutions, they try and think of one child, 25 square feet, 400 square feet classroom, and one desk per child. I think that kind of setup is the one that creates rigidity in thinking, in my experience. So yeah,
So
so I think I've seen amazing schools that are like absolutely crazily designed and built, or even spaces for children where there are no walls, there is no barrier for thinking, and all of these exist in the minds of adults, I think. Yeah.
I'll tell you, Vinny, that recently, like 2 or 3 days back, while we were curating the theme and narratives for Pulse, so Yogi actually suggested for the new building code standards that have been announced for the schools and learning spaces. Even Shrija ma'am would know that CBSE has like 500 square feet for one classroom. They
Yeah.
have this, like what you were
Yeah, some
saying.
standards. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, on that regard, we have a question for Shrija. So, Shrija, how do rigid academic layouts communicate distrust to young learners? And how does applying environment as the third teacher help them take psychological ownership of their growth? All yours.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me for this webinar, this live. This is a wonderful conversation to have and a very important conversation to have, actually. Um, so, I still remember when I was thinking about the school, okay, the conversation was around how do we enable the space to talk to the children in a way that is inviting, in a way that makes them feel competent, in a way that makes them feel like they can own this to move themselves forward, right? So one of the biggest conversations was around, how desks and benches are laid out like this, and what you end up really seeing is somebody's back, right? You don't see the face. And the large majority of our memories of being in school is associated with our friends, right? Is associated with relationships. And if you can't sit in relationship with each other, it actually takes away and deprives the learning opportunity that the child has. So one of the things that really works is to keep children in smaller pods facing each other, also in a larger group, when they're discussing something facing each other, that kind of circular arrangement where you can see each other's face versus see somebody's back, and then through that see something that a teacher or a content that is written on the board that is visible, changes what is at the center, right? What is at the center is the child, their feelings, their relationship with each other, and what matters for their lived experience when you are actually in the circular presence with each other in small pods and larger groups. But what happens when you're looking at somebody's back is that you're really focused what is around and within doesn't matter. What matters is what is being put out there in a disconnected fashion by somebody else, right? And that kind of an invitation actually is narrow, is depriving the child of really being the whole of what they can. Now when you put children in such groups, what immediately comes into play is feelings and interpersonal things, right? So the person who is working with the children need to be open to the fact that that's part of the learning experience. So just because you're not seeing it in the other setup doesn't mean it's not happening. Chits are being passed, people are poking each other, they're pinching each other, all of that stuff is happening still, right? So where is the agency, where is the autonomy for the child to actually be different, right? The environment, without saying anything, the way it's designed actually tells the child whether I trust you to learn or I don't trust you to learn. Do I see you as human, or do I see you as an object in a larger path of something else that is being designed, right? So that's one very, very important thing. The second thing with environment as a third teacher is how open is it to actually move around for the child. So for example, one of the things that we do is after every class, children are moving. So the movement is very important for the child's learning experience, right? And they find their way to the other place. When we started it, people were like, "What if they don't reach the other class?" Right? Which is true. It's a very important design decision, but because it's important and because a child chooses to reach the other class, it means they care, right? So in the beginning, when children actually are disconnected, they'll actually run out, right? And that's fine because you know that there is a protest, there is a disagreement, and that's when that comes to the table. Otherwise, they're sitting there and somebody keeps coming and going. The child doesn't know they have a choice, right? So offering that kind of a choice spatially through design of the space, right, it really, really matters. The third thing that happens in schools, unfortunately, okay, coming out of preschools, children still have access to a lot of materiality, lot of materials, that you give them thinking that that's important, colors are important. You look at school walls, you look at school spaces, right, become very drab, become very dematerialized, decontextualized in that sense, right? So giving access as materials, for children to actually play, touch, feel, access is also a very, very important thing according to me. It really shows children that learning is not single dimensional, it's not just abstract, it's not just words and letters, right? So all of these are dimensional experiences, and the last but not the least is the nature or the kind of context surrounding the child, right? So that's also an invitation to play. So for children to be able to climb trees, to be able to just climb things, have different kinds of places to sit, be, pod themselves in different ways, in informal ways, right, really enables discussions, really enables them to say, hey, let's go sit there, that looks like a quiet spot for us to have this discussion, or let me sit here, with my laptop with two other people to actually do this. I want to do a survey, can we go stand against that background to do something, right? So that kind of just availability of different textural spaces, and different kinds of height kind of spaces, and then the design of enabling them to make those choices really, works out for children. So we love the fact that that is a possibility for children to be able to do, compared to the traditional spaces which are not really enabling children to actually coexist and co-learn. Right?
Hmm.
Really, you want to say something? That was an amazing insight.
No,
Yes.
I think so. Which is what my thinking would be is even before you look at a compliance versus a spatial design mindset, it really need to be asked. Who has that permission to change that space particularly in that context? Because how do you really define that
Yes.
softer part before you design the hardware? And that is where
Yes.
the biggest challenge comes out. So
Yes.
hold on,
Yes.
I need just
Yes. And can the furniture serve as a space, furniture or whatever
yeah,
it is that
because
children are
I think
working with, to
all that is.
together and to be.
See, and do I have a control? Am I allowed to do that? Can I choose to sit on the
Yes.
floor? For that matter, or
Yes.
can I stand and
Yeah.
work? Because the biggest
Yeah.
challenge of the whole equation, like Srija, that we mentioned about that, we know our schools like in big, rows and columns of desks and benches. Is because the whole industrial age has made it a, single way efficient models. So,
Yeah.
if we change that efficiency models to effective models or an efficacy model, that would have a very different approach. So, I
Yeah.
think very, very relevant in that context from Shreya's
Absolutely.
end. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Absolutely. So
Srija and
who does
Vinit,
the child want to be? They want. Yeah.
Nakshi is saying
so
something.
Srija and Vinit, you may also know that in the sitting position in our asanas, it is called as Sukhasan, right?
Mhm.
So, Yogi, you also told that while they are having in Sukhasan position, the way their blood flows and the way their focus comes while learning is happening, right?
And see again,
So that calls.
you have all that available. Point is at what's whose permission. The bigger thing is that
Yes.
rather than you have all that biological, neurological, somatic, cognitive action networks. There is everything available. But is there an intent? If I am physically sitting somewhere, am I mentally engaged there? If
Hmm.
I'm not mentally there, whole idea fails. Your learning goes to zero. Okay, so
Yeah.
today we do not have sensors or fMRI where it is saying, the classroom is making someone learn. So how do you really see those physical parameters of, active engagement that my learning or my connection to this whole cohort is happening?
Hmm.
So which is where I think
Yeah.
the biggest and important point that are we mentally engaged with this whole equation?
Hmm.
Because
Yeah.
if we don't have an active participation, nothing will happen. That's the key part of it. So, I
Yes.
think
Yes.
what Shrija was mentioning is very, very relevant in terms of that. Do they have a choice, or is a school management or someone who's responsible of designing is okay to allow that kind of chaos also? Let them figure out their own clarity in the whole process, because that is where the biggest question comes out. And parental expectation is another burden on the whole process when school designs are happening, because anyone who's take the decisions about making a brief, they always look at from parental expectation. What's going to happen to the kid at the end of
Yes.
the year. And that's where I think it needs a kudos to people like Shrija or others who's taking that kind of risk to challenge that mindset. You know,
Hmm.
it is okay to fail that way. It is okay to have that chaos and really figure around that, because at the end of the day, education's goal is has to be on self elevation rather than occupation. If we cannot elevate an individual through education, and even they occupied somewhere, they would fit into a midlife crisis or an identity crisis eventually, because it has been chosen for them rather than they chose themselves. So I think that's what it has to be the core of the whole intention of design.
There's this
Right.
one.
So, Yogi, yes, yes, Vinit, please.
No, there's this one thing which I wanted to say is like very long back, I was learning acting in FTI. Like I was in FTI. So our professor used to say you should never know when you're acting. People should not know. So it's the same way in schools. If children come to know they are being preached or taught to, or they are being learned, like they are
Yes,
learners,
yes,
if
yes.
they come to know, like specifically in our case, like if you preach to a child and you make them think they are being taught something, you failed as a designer or maybe as a school, because the minute they come to know that something is happening or conditioning something is happening so that they are being conditioned to do something, I think that bit of design fails because they don't want to listen. They want to do what they mind. And if there is a lot of curiosity, like how Shrija is saying, with everything, and nobody's forcing them to learn, I think that's the best environment. Yeah.
And even you can force, but they would not act. They
Yeah.
either they
Yeah.
would go numb, they would
Yeah.
go mentally somewhere else. They
Yeah,
would not
you
act
can't
the way
sell
you are.
them. You
Yeah,
can't sell children like how you
yeah,
can like do sometimes manipulation with adults. You can't do that with children. They self-engage or they don't engage. There is no like barrier to like like no, you can't be a salesman with bad design to children.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. That is for sure happening
What
at
is
Bombay.
interesting is that no matter what, the interpersonal dynamics are always at play. So even if the forcing is happening, what begins to happen is some children suddenly start to show some spark. Okay. And that spark is generally around how can I be better than the other person? How can I look better than the other person? And it's an extrinsically driven motivation to look
Mm.
good, to be first, because that's what
Mhm.
the system is actually prompting, right? Are you the best?
And
But are you above
Yeah,
the others, not my internal best, right? And that takes children in a certain direction,
agree.
right? So they feel, and you feel like, oh, they are doing well. If somebody can do well, that means the rest of them can do well. And that every comparison, oh, others are not good enough. But that's not true. What we've really done is in the interpersonal dynamics, we've just found somebody who wants to run faster, but at the end of the day they're still running the rat race,
Yes.
right? So they're not trying to elevate, they're not trying to self observe, right? None of that is happening. They're just running faster and we're like, oh, that we're cheering, right? Like, go for it, right? So but there are tracks built, so
Agree.
they move on, like, Yogi said, they reach a place where you're burnt, you're like, what am I running for? That question will come, but when it comes is the question, right? So
Because there's a biological phenomena when humans really age from 0 to 5. At the age of 3 to 4, at the brink of that, there's a lot of studies happen about ego building in humans. So when I start saying as a kid that this is my cup, that's my mother, or I will give it to someone, I would not allow other to give it. So that phenomena, when it starts building as an developmental brain developmental ego formation, it lot of time taken drive at a different pathway in the schools and other societal construct, which is where that feeling of red races and races starts working around, and then you start losing your identity eventually from that path.
So, Yogi, now we have like a very precise question coming to your expertise also.
Okay.
So now let's move from the first theme to the second theme. It is about designing for usability, autonomy, and ownership. And
Mhm.
the context is moving students from passive consumers of space to active co-designers. So, what physical tools enable this agility on campus, and how does modular, reconfigurable furniture allow youth to adapt their environments on demand?
So Akshay, again, I would come back to solutions are immense. The what design can do is an affordance or a provisions. Okay, we only can create available choices in this space. So the first thinking which we try to put when we start looking at design is how much it is non-constraining. Is it giving a signal of constraining when you're designing something, or stopping someone doing something? Second part, which is because if I provisioning for multiple things. If I'm provisioning someone to sit on the floor, so I just try to look at, is the surface insulated enough, that when a kid sits on the floor or in a rug or in a carpet or anything, he feels comfortable, his body feels comfortable. So that's a provisioning. Now the provisioning he's choosing or not is a different pathway. So in the whole process of designing, you can only provision multiple approaches, that which is flexible, agile, diverse, age appropriate, ergonomics appropriate. So are they allowed for multi-pedagogy when you have an adult and a kids relationship coming together? Are we allowing that? Can teacher also switch her brain to a different style of teaching today? So if she feels to teach in participatory way, can she choose? Or she wanted to do it in a, let's say, Socratic circle method. Okay, can she allow, she can do that way. So all of those things are, so if you are looking at those kind of possibilities, we try to look at provisioning and affordance, nothing more. Once you have that, eventually kids and the users in this space would look at their own pathway. And it's changing hour by hour also. If the system of the
Yeah.
permission is there, or the allowance in the whole intent is there. But if you are doing your school by lesson plan, or 45 minutes delivery of content, if your models are like that, it may not work, because you're just been gone delivered without bothering what
Yeah.
happened to other. You're just done with that. Okay. And your whole assessment would be based on that idea. So if we really wanted to have that openness coming from the top-down approach, that it is okay to discuss something 30 more minutes, if it's making sense. The whole schema of thing of operating a school, as a designer, you can provision it, provision to multiple extensions,
Yeah.
provision it for people to feel belonging into that. If I wanted to feel, let's say, like she was mentioning, if I wanted to get into a cave space, I'm not feeling today to get engaged. Can I have a place in the campus or school or classroom where I can go and sit with myself? Can that happen to me? Okay, because think of the mindset when kids are coming from their houses to school, what they may have gone through, and switching
Yeah.
to something, how
Yeah.
easy it could be. It's a human development process. Somewhere we need to really understand that the whole idea of school and education is human development rather than anything else. So if we are provisioning that way for a
Yeah.
human-centered design, that's a very core workability, and kids would find their different ways. We had done a lot of product designs, and I don't know, I've shown you or not Akshay,
Yeah.
but we created a D Ottoman, very interesting piece. I would have it with me myself also, and we provisioned it for three styles. Kids used it in fourth way. We couldn't even imagine that. So design process is always an open-ended, evolved process. You use a double diamond, you use a 5D or any systemic
Yeah.
approach of designing, it will evolve, because you cannot make all the constraints a human can relate to something. So it will be evolutionary in that approach. So are we open enough to continuously evolve that out? So that's the way we will be working around it.
No, no, no. Lovely take on human-centered
Yeah.
design and human development, and that actually brings the question to back to Srija. Like, how does co-creating study pods, collaborative nooks, and activity zones directly build intrinsic motivation and resilience in students?
Yeah, yeah. I think what Yogi was saying is so beautiful, right? Like the space can only be provisioned or create affordances, right? And what are you really designing around needs to still be the human, still be the child, and that makes all the difference for what you're really trying to do. So when we are looking at intrinsic motivation, right, I was referring to it a little earlier too, that it's very easy to design systems where the child wants to jump over hurdles that have been set by somebody else, or become or look better than just somebody else, right? Just enough, right? And that's called the hanging the carrot model, right? And the child is kind of trying to work towards it and just do enough. What is intrinsic motivation that comes from within, right? The child could still be motivated to want to achieve things, right? But when it comes from within, it is for reasons bigger than just wanting to look better than somebody else, right? So you're talking about the child autonomy, that I have the space to figure things out, right? And then the child feeling competent that I'm capable of figuring something out, right? And the child feels like this is my space, I belong here and I matter here, and hence I will bring my competence and utilize that autonomy, right? So all of this comes together to create a space which will enable child to actually exercise or bring about that intrinsic motivation, right? So what begins to happen is that the moment you shift the spaces or the autonomy of a how are you sitting together to the child choosing. So for example, a pod based sitting, right? When the child is doing their own work, the pod based seating enables you to sit in a pod which is appropriate for you right now, but at the same time you can finish the work and you can move pods, right? Which is competency, which is autonomy, right? Which is belonging in action. Nobody is looking down upon you, you're not lesser because that happens, right? And then when the children are actually together building something, the pods can come together, right? And that becomes a flexible space where they're co-building everything, they're showcasing something, they can go from one pod to another looking at what work somebody else has done for the same prompt, which could be different from my thinking process. And sometimes people ask, how is it possible, how many things can children really think about, right? You'll always be surprised. You can run the same prompt n number of years, you still have n number of responses, right? And even for the same response, the representation together will always be different. And that's the beginning of intrinsic motivation, where the child knows that they matter and I'm not in competition with somebody else, right? We are collaborators on this journey, we are co-travelers on this journey. So when you move, I learn from you and I can move forward further, right? And spaces and design of spaces and thinking about learning can actually enable all of this to happen, where the children don't feel like I have to step on top of somebody else to do something. Another thing that really really interestingly works when you do this kind of pod and participatory work, right, and flexible space work, is that children begin to see the other as human, right? Not just as another roll number. So when somebody is present or absent, it matters. The person's voice matters. Today this person didn't come. Generally, that a lot of ideas or generally pushes us to move, right? There is an identity that the child has in that small group, and the child is missed. Right? It makes a huge difference, right? Because I want to show up in spaces where I am cared about, where I yesterday you didn't come, you know what we did today, I have been placed for you to actually participate and do this work, or your voice was not heard, will you want to contribute, right? What do you want to say? It matters, and the children actually care about being part of this whole thing. So the intrinsic motivation starts to happen when spaces are designed to enable this autonomy, competence, agency, and a sense of belonging, that the child actually feels that they are a part of something bigger than them.
Amazing,
It is
amazing.
true, because I was talking to someone recently that if you really look at from a human centered, if we are bringing the world is coming to life centered design, okay, and kids have that innate curiosity to connect to the nature building around it, and that whole ecosystem starts so cohesive, even from the guards or the people who are taking them into the buses to anyone who's a caretaker or gardener or anyone, they start, it's a cohesive community. They start interacting in a small bits and pieces, and that goes much beyond what you can think of it.
Yes.
So that communal space is
Yes,
very very
yes.
relevant, and you learn a lot from all other factors as a learner.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Absolutely. In
Vinit, the
fact,
examples that
the outside spaces,
Sorry, yeah, she just said something.
go ahead. The
no,
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 you were
outside
saying something.
spaces
Yeah.
where children play, right? We have created spaces which are structured spaces. Obviously, there are adventure playgrounds and things like that, but there are also unstructured spaces where there's mud, there is rocks, there is tree stumps, and children actually build worlds, like what Vinit was saying. Every single day newer worlds are being built by newer groups of children. Younger ones invite older kids. Very interesting play happens there. So one day I saw a child climbing on top of and sitting on top of another thing that was like a rock that was kept against the tree, and he climbed on top of the tree and he was putting something up with yellow thread. So I asked him, what are you doing? He said, ma'am, everything that we had kept here, we had made pots and all that stuff, learning the other group, we had kept it here, has been stolen. Okay, putting up a CCTV camera so that nobody steals, or if they steal, we know who is stealing They will be scared. He was at it for 2 days, rolls of paper, and I don't know. It's a make believe thing. It was not even real, but he put it up and then he went on warning everybody. I have put up a CCTV camera. You beware, don't steal stuff. So it's very interesting, right, for children to want to do that work over
Hmm.
a couple of hours. Just yeah. It's
No, it is the world that we create.
Well, in actual sense, the co-designers of the space. And so this
Yeah.
brings us to the third theme, the magic of informal spaces, liminal zones, and hands-on hubs. So the context here is why the most meaningful breakthroughs happen outside the traditional classroom setup in informal maker hubs, corridors, courtyard steps, and transitional zones. So the question here
Hmm.
comes to Vinny. Vinny, informal learning environments rely heavily on tactile touch points, hands-on experimentation, and unscripted curiosity. So, how can school campuses integrate these informal design principles to spark spontaneous peer mentoring and real-world problem solving?
Yeah, these are actually the most important ways learning actually happens is not inside these formal. So I call it like boxes, because unfortunately, if you look at the average school design of this country, not the best designers and the best schools, like the ones we know, is actually a box, and it's going to take, I think, decades to unbox it, like so. So and the box is a six-sided cube, and sadly that is the average primitive design module for 90% of design for schools. And peer mentoring is not a program that you can kind of install, like peer mentoring is something that is constantly happening, whether it is CBSE, ICSE, or whatever. Children are constantly learning from other children. So if you think that you need a program and it's a byproduct, and you cannot mentor someone's work that you have never seen, so children have to see other children, and all these classrooms are actually, in my head, non-learning spaces. Sometimes the thing, the actual real learning, in my experience. So when we design learning environments for children, we want to create non-circular or non-closed loops, or non-linear paths, or places where they just go, exploration happens, and it is not scripted. And non-scripted spaces are unfortunately the hardest, and sometimes, like, you can have shelves, not display cases, like open shelves where if someone has made something, it can be put up. The biggest opportunity in this country where you don't even have to spend anything is the corridors and the staircases of schools, where these is just painted white, with absolutely nothing. So in a few of the museums and a few of the buildings that we have done for children, we've done crazy stuff on these kinds of spaces, because here is where there is no agency. So there's no model of a teacher and a child. A child can take his lunch box, sit with his friends, and they can discuss whatever the parents were up to the day before. There is no like structured learning environment. And so railings, staircases, maybe terraces. So, and actually, one of the biggest things that I find is that there is no lens of the adult observing them here. So they want, like, the older kids actually find these spaces really easy. And one biggest thing that I find with schools and furniture is that furniture should disappear when learning happens. It should not be like the the third thing in the room, because then when actual real learning is happening, uh, you don't want to actually focus on the red chair. Okay, the red chair should just disappear and things should happen. So all of these informal spaces, I think, are important. So like in this museum, that some one of the museum that we've done at Muso, we've not done any false ceilings. So when you look up, you will see fire pipes, you will see plumbing pipes, you will see sanitary, like sanitation pipes, and we've labeled them. We've just labeled it, and they read it. And a lot of times, I've seen that people take extraordinary effort to do false ceilings to hide everything. But I think it's important that you just let them see the things that they have to see too, and you don't have to. Actually, so learning doesn't have to be scripted. All these spaces can create learning environments and learning
Yeah.
narratives entirely on their own.
No,
Yeah.
so actually,
Vinny,
I
do
would
you
aid
have
from
those?
a very different viewpoint what Vinit is putting across from an adulthood mindset. So a lot of like he mentioned about average school design. Uh, when we look at these kids who are at 17 passing and coming, in the new world at 18, you suddenly expect them to grow. You suddenly expect them to take all the decisions. All that agency starts coming. We start coming to them when they're getting into college. But when you look at those age
Yeah.
17 till 17, they're in the schools, how much allowance that really got it? Now, is our classrooms are designed with the real world relevance where they can really simulate the experience of the world they're going to get into? When someone going to work today in offices or even in my office, the kind of collaboration level expected with them and the kind of competition level they have been gone through in these schools are two different worlds altogether.
Yeah.
So when you look
Yeah.
at the adulthood, we're talking about youth, day as in theme. So I think when you look at India's youth, how distracted the journey are, because your education has been training you differently, where the world is moving very differently. They are going to work on the technology which is not
Yes.
invented yet. They need to work on
Yeah.
the job which is not discovered yet. The
Yeah.
world is going to be so unpredictable. Okay.
Mm.
How do you really prepare them for those kind of adaptive intelligences in the classrooms? Are they okay to fail? How do they really retry it? How do you really build the resilience inside them? How do you really
Mm.
get that negotiation with other
Yeah.
individuals? Because all of
Mm.
this gonna get faced when they're
Yeah.
gonna get into the outside world. So,
Mm.
from that way,
Yeah.
how much are we preparing them in those spaces? So, like when you're mentioning about the corridors and all of this, how does they can become a space for those kind of negotiation with other adults? Okay, so
Yes.
and those are the things which we really really had to look at on a deeper aspect. Else, we are getting into there's a very good saying by Dr. Ken Robinson. He says, learning is acquiring new skills and knowledge. Education is a planned program for learning. School is a community where education ought to happen. And the sad part is human love learning, but we have serious problems with our schooling. So our innate behavior is learning. We are curious by behavior. Okay, it is
Mm.
killed by schools
Sure.
because the
Yeah.
planned program or the community is designed in such a way which is not letting them prepare for the world they have not seen. We are
Yeah.
preparing for the world which we had seen already. So it's
Mm.
whole thing is working in hindsight, in a past experience. It is not working on the future experiences. So that is one take which we have to take in the and it will take a lot of time, like Vinit was mentioning about unboxing the boxes. You know, will need much
Yeah.
bigger orientation, where the
Yeah.
adulthood can really really
Yes.
sustain to the kind of adulthood they're going to experience, because like Zen Alpha or AI driven world is coming around, how this kid would really be thinking about. Sadly, we don't have institutes in India where they're researching about the subject. We're researching about relation between space to human development. We don't have this where cognitive development or impact of technology on humans can be studied and then they can be applied. So those kind of researches and subjects are very much needed so that we can create the platform. People in the uh, delay of decisions that this is the only model working around and we are following the
Mm.
same. Very less who takes the dare of changing it differently, and they had to face a lot. It is not easy journey. I very much echo on that with Shija and all, but because it is very different world. It is very hard to make a parent understood that what is their responsibility. Today's parenthood is also like handing over their kids to school, understanding that school will make them grow. So parenting so there is it is big loop, and that all that is cohesive community curation research awareness has to be built to that, so that we can really think on a deeper development of our adults for the future they really want to see to.
I
Yeah.
On
I
that note,
Yeah. Great.
No, I
yeah,
think
yeah,
Vinit was
please.
saying something.
No, I was just so
Yeah.
this is one very big question in my head as a space because I'm an architect is the whole idea of the disappearance of the classroom in design, like I want to see like in the next 5-10 years how much time because I think there are maybe few more models, but there are two more very distinct models in our country. One is that the same classroom for 8 hours becomes a drawing space, becomes a learning space for science, becomes a learning space for dance, becomes a learning space for yoga, becomes a lunch space. So that is one model. And the other model is that you have a dance room, a PT room, a teach whatever, like a drawing room, and the kids move. Okay, so essentially there are two models, and maybe there are some outdoor spaces. So, and if you kind of not compare it to education and for a minute think about how COVID changed offices, like we work, and now there is this whole idea of hot desk that there is no office. So I want to see how schools will, because at some point in time, schools will have to look at the disappearance of walls, classrooms, and like how now, like if you work with any one of the big four Fortune 500 or big companies like Ernst and Young or whatever, you just have to have a laptop and you can go and hot desk and work anywhere. There is no cubicle, there is no office cabin, there is no desk. Sometimes you can go and work in one office in Bangalore, and the next day you can work in another office, and the third day you can work in Hyderabad, and the fourth day you can work in Mumbai, and you can even be working from an airport. And I want to see how that parallel comes to the education industry, because very slowly with democratization of knowledge, because now you don't need to like actually have a teacher. With online education, it's been shown, I mean, I'm not saying anything about schools, but that the internet and your peers are the biggest drivers of the learning experience. So yeah,
But
so this
I
is the
would
big
add
question. Yeah.
one very big key point onto this is, and because I'm facing both the worlds differently, and when we hired today, I had seen a couple of new hires. They were afraid to come down to offices because they're so okay to work from home. So
Yeah,
we
yeah.
really need
And
to
this is
put,
the new world we are
yeah,
living in.
we really need to be put a context to that very strongly, because that social intelligence of human
Hmm.
behavior has to be protected at the school level also. And so we have to walk a very fine line when we are making them ready for that world which is coming around, but how that human context building with them is also been alive, because a lot of deprivation when you don't have real human touch and connections,
Yes.
that social anxiety and social fear, that guy could not work with the office.
Yeah.
He eventually resigned. His whole 4 years of work post COVID, he was at home, so he couldn't take a lot of people around it. So we are at a very different space, and when this whole Zen beta and generations are coming, we have to be very very careful about putting all that into right space. That because if we are talking about
Yeah.
peer-to-peer learning, accessibility has to be touched down. And I would say from a different viewpoint, Vinit, that today we need teachers to shift roles. Probably we don't need teachers; we need mentors. Probably there, we need
Hmm.
guides, we need motivators. We need adults who can become that peer, and they can become adult when that a special caution is needed with them, because that the kind of society we really want to bring around has to have that touch point also.
Hmm.
Else, the whole world can go to a different toss. So I think what we had also emotionally alive, being the human side of it, because like when you read Yuval from Homo sapiens, only breed who can sustain whatever being sapiens is because of that social context, and it's a very strong inner part of us,
Yeah.
which has to be put somewhere protected along with that design philosophy when we're coming around.
Yeah.
So let's
Yeah.
also have an
Yeah.
educator.
I
So
think
Srija,
this is
what
a
would be
very
your answer
interesting.
to?
Sorry, yes, Shiza, go on, go on.
Yeah. I was actually, yeah, reflecting on Vinith and Yogi were saying that how can the classroom, right? Is there another model that's possible? So I was thinking about it from the philosophy of, hey, the world is heading in a certain direction. The world is becoming more complex. It's becoming more chaotic, right? The systems which worked in an industry where, hey, things go in a linear fashion, what caused something, so you can fix it in a certain way. Those kind of thinking is breaking. But having said, thinking is also preliminary thinking that the child needs to layer upon. You cannot suddenly jump and
Hmm.
feed complexity to a human being and expect that they can process it. So all children are in lived reality in relation to all these four zones. Simple, complicated, complex, and chaotic. All zones are in work for them. We lived in worlds which were quite a bit simple, little complicated,
Yeah.
little complexity as we grew up. But not chaotic, right? Today
Chaotic,
it's
yes.
actually quite difficult to an extent where children can go to despair and really go to
Yeah.
hopelessness, right? So we need to figure out a balance. To be spaces where they can be, where they can just belong, right? Where they can come together in small groups, right? So you will need close, constrained spaces. It cannot be always open, anything goes, right? That is extreme level chaos. So in design, in the school, we have both these possibilities. So there are these spaces get converted into cozy nooks for conversations or for a class. They also get converted into, hey, we are now dealing with complex problems in the world, or a problem that I really want to work about, abuse in families. Let's talk about junk food issues and child diabetes, right? We'll talk about how communities are fracturing in their own interesting way. So the same child suddenly gets into complex groups addressing complex and chaotic problems, and then all the spaces open out and become very flexible, right? So children are sitting just about anywhere with a laptop. They're sitting on top of a tree. They're sitting on top of each other sometimes, right? And it doesn't matter, right? They're calling each other. Like I saw the other day a seventh grader calling out to a third grader, "Come, I want to do a survey with you." And the third grader looks at, "For what? For what do you want to do a survey with me?" And they're standing in the corridor and doing this conversation, right? And he has a laptop in his hand, and that child has a book in his hand. I think that child was headed towards another conversation,
Mm.
and he's like, "I have 2 minutes I can give you." "Yeah, yeah, 2 minutes is enough." The other one says, "What do you want? You also come. Two of you come. We will do survey," right? This is when they're dealing with the complex or chaotic problems, where they have the space to kind of be anywhere and do different kinds of things, but they also reflect upon events, upon an outcome, upon something that they have done. They come together to cozy, close spaces. They don't want somebody else obstructing, interrupting that conversation in some way. So you do need those closed spaces, but you need to have a purpose to why you're using what. And children need to be flexible, like Yogi was saying, to be able to move across these places and learn from these places, right? So I have also seen the movement of, no walls classroom fail significantly. Just sheer noise levels, just sheer amount of disruption that happens in movement, and nobody can get a word in, right? If everybody's voice matters, nobody's voice matters, right? So I think centers, purposes, meaning needs to be designed along spaces, and then spaces need to, like you said very rightly, affordances, and allow for that permission to happen, to make it change and morph. Both are needed. You need to be able to cultivate structure in chaos. You need to be able to move towards chaos with courage, right? Both are needed in design. So we consciously create space for both. And like you people said, it's very true. It's difficult for parents to understand, because we grew up in a certain setting. Why are children sitting like that? Why are they all
Yes.
over the place? Why is there so much sound, right? I said there are two kinds of sounds. There is a sound which is of laughter, of conversation, of camaraderie, of collaboration, and there is a sound which is of pathos. There's a call for help. They're
Yeah.
screaming at each other, not able to solve, kind of which, if you're an educator, you're a mentor, coach, when you're standing around what's happening, so you turn to that direction as needed, right? You don't intervene if it's not needed.
Mhm.
They're fine. They know how to manage that space. So yeah, that's probably what I
This is
would bring
very
to the table.
important, and
That's
I
something that I
have
would bring to the
worked with.
table in the little spaces
Sure. Yeah.
conversation. Sorry, you go ahead, Yogi, and I was changing topic. I think
No,
you're
no, yeah,
extending
go,
what
go,
I'm
go,
saying.
go.
Go ahead.
Sorry. No, no, go on, go on. No, so my point is, because when we work with a couple of
Yeah,
schools,
I was
and sorry, I think we're. The point which I was trying to make is, when we're designing those things, the small detailed or signals which which path to take when this is happening. So decibel sounds, okay, you're just making relevance to very young learners. They're less than 6 years, but they could see the signs on the board that this is the pathway to move, and that's not to disturb. So they choose that voices also based on the signages, the simple details. But the managing of this whole chaos and sounds and movements are also been consciously designed in this space where there's open and closed versions. That if you are working in an open office today, so one group is interested in doing something, another group is doing something else. Okay, how do you don't feel disturbed? So that
Yeah.
decibel, choices are also very, very important,
Yeah.
critical. How do you really interact about? Sorry, yeah, this is what I was trying to.
Yes. True. 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 Yeah. I liminal spaces. I was thinking about for children, nature, us and us, as
Hmm.
in human to human, and then human to
Yes.
the abstract world of AI technology, which is not very visible, all pervasive in your life. All these three interactions are liminal spaces, and they make sense. Right? How does a school environment enable all these three? The seasonal changes that happen in nature, right? Something out there, which is in decays, right? The seasonal changes actually bring out different kinds of ways in which interact. There is water on the slushy mud, then it actually becomes slushy. You can jump into it as puddle, but it also becomes difficult to walk. You have to be careful around that space. You can see. So all of those are interesting forms of, they don't completely cover all the spaces. You allow for them to understand nature changes. There are changes that happen seasonally, and we interact with it in this way. It is telling me something, reacting and responding to nature in certain ways. Those interactions are missing today. So we are having to conduct, in school, schools are conducting nature education programs, whereas children can just stay very tuned in if that space is made available. Reasonable risk, reasonable exposure, right? If you make it available, it really makes for a human to human. You're also very busy minimizing. Don't bully. Don't do this. Don't do that. But how do you really see each other, right? How do you really create that space for the collaboration where you hold space for them to resolve something, repair something, teach them the basics of how do you see another as human, but you also hold space for them to actually develop that skill to do it, and then you have the technology spaces. So seamlessly technology integrates into these spaces in our school. There is a lot of spaces where the technology belongs to that learning area, that learning space, not to the human. So they can pick it up, they can use it, they can interact with each other collaboratively, they can put it back. They also there's a conversation that is beginning to happen around how does artificial intelligence interact with human intelligence, and where is it that you are surrendering, and where is it that you're thinking with, right? Where is it thinking instead of you? Where are you thinking with? So all of these conversations are actually very connected, right? Somebody who cannot interact with nature, somebody who cannot interact with each other, will not suddenly be interacting with an artificial intelligence or a technology in a mindful way. They're only going to be coming to it from a hurt, from an insufficiency space, and that is a vulnerable space. No matter what rules you put in place, the child is not going to feel competent to actually interact. So these are very connected liminal spaces that way, that need to be made available, and it's not one versus the other for the child. That was the other.
Yeah. Yes.
Uh, Vinit, what Shrija was initially mentioning did remind me of the ad from Surf Excel, Daag Achhe Hain, right?
Yeah.
कल यहाँ बारिश हुई, yesterday, and all the children went out and jumped into the mud. So we have videos and videos of दाग अच्छे हैं. We sent a message to parents exactly on the same lines. दाग अच्छे हैं, गुस्सा नहीं करना. So you have
Right.
little wet, sludgy children coming home today.
Right, right.
And very relevant
So,
from a viewpoint, the generation we are getting says, mango would come from Blinkit. They would really need to have exposure to those, thinking. Else, their life would be ending around that only.
Yeah.
yeah. So I have a common question. Let's start from Vinit
Mm-hmm.
in the fag end of this session. That what is one immediate actionable step a school owner or campus administrator can take next week to incorporate informal learning spaces and hand over physical agency to the of their environment back to the students?
I think that mapping what your guys are doing, or how it is the space is being used, like that is the first inherent knowledge that any school owner has. You just have to see, because I have seen too many design processes where there's a designer, there's a school owner, and things get built. Okay, fine, done. But then after that, there's this thing which in architecture design we call post occupancy evaluation, which is how actually is it being used versus what was the perceived designer's idea or your idea. And a lot of times things don't match, it's fine. It's like nobody is forcing, like but after seeing that, if let's say a classroom is not getting used the way you envisaged it being used, maybe after a semester or after a quarter, I would say that try and start doing soft, subtle changes, because things are reversible. Okay, because a lot of times people live with design disasters as if they are married to them. Okay, so yeah, so that is one thing that I say, that it's actually, it needs no budget approval, no committee, no designer. It's just reverse simple problems, okay? And these can be like starting with the lights, even the curtains, it can be with like simple things like furniture, it can be with wall paint. The second thing is that I feel that far too many school owners think that space is, or the paint on the wall is very non-sacrificial, like, so yeah, it has to look spick and span and white, and no matter you get like the best designers or the best materials, a school has to look like a school. It is not going to look like the parliament, or a hospital. It has to look like a school. So I think you have to be open to wear and tear and surfaces that children will actively engage in. And I think of a lot of times the expectations with materials and spaces is that it has to look beautiful. So I remember there's this thing that happens in Germany and Japan. The first day of school, children actually clean all the walls and paint them, clean the toilets, and make it new for the new academic year. And there's a lot of agency involved in it. And I think a lot of schools in India, not like the good ones, but they don't allow children agency. Like they won't allow a child to take up a paintbrush and paint the walls. Because for some reason it is the adult's job. So I feel that smaller things like these can actually be like, I'm not talking about spending a lot to make change. I'm talking about change in mindset of creating simple environments for education where uh, hand over a key, remove the lock, maybe you buy paint, don't buy new furniture, or you prototype newer ideas in cardboard. Like, I think simple things like these can actually, like we do these all the time in design schools, like rather if you have problems with walls getting stuck with too much artwork, then we have things that move on wheels, like, so you get them in the classroom, you get them out. So there's like a whole prototypical kit that school owners can themselves make, which can actually start solving smaller problems, and then you actually invest in interiors or architecture. Is something that I feel that when I go to schools, this is, I continuously keep on seeing problems, but I feel that everyone just wants like the superstar designer to come and solve all the. I don't think so. There is any designer, or like the school owners or the schools are themselves the best designers or solutions, people who can find solutions to their problems. That's.
The takeaway message that I have as a final takeaway, both common to Sri and Yogi. In one takeaway message, trust the single fastest way to prepare young adult leadership. Shrija.
I was actually trying to answer that question too. Can I just quickly say what can
Yeah,
enable
yeah,
agency
please.
to develop and then address them? I think if you add free play into your curriculum, it will really enable agency and children really using that very autonomously and doing things that is needed. So just removing the taboo around play and letting children play, just invoking different kinds of materials that you could play with, which includes technology. You could have different kinds of provocations that you could set up for children. So if I were to add one thing that will enable agency, children autonomously playing something, competence development, I would say free play. Right. So that leads me. Can you more the spatial trust question?
Sure, sure. In one takeaway message,
Can you say
why
that?
is spatial trust? Why is spatial trust the single fastest way to prepare young adults for real world leadership?
I think if children are able to move around and be around in spaces where they can, where they have autonomy and they have agency, um, the kind of belief that they have that they can change the world, because my world, the world that I interact with in small ways where I'm learning, I have a lot of agency, right? And that agency then translates into something bigger. So one of the things that we're working with this year as a theme is being change makers, and we're talking about how the world is quite a bit in despair, what with the world wars and AI and mental health issues and climate change, right? And how do you really walk children towards hope is a conversation that we've been having. One of the key elements of hope, involves agency. It involves having a goal, like a larger purpose, and having pathways to get there. And all the three, have a very visceral component to it. If you're not able to physically have agency, to move, to play, to do, to think about how do I sit to be comfortable, right, to be able to participate in something, you're actually taking away the child's agency very, very significantly. So the whole component of leadership is about cultivating and nurturing hope and creating pathways to be able to get there in today's world, and having the skills and agency to then spatial trust is one of the most important thing according to me. Like just giving children that space to co-design and co-learn is important. So yeah.
Yogi, the same question for
Yeah.
you.
So think of humans have very very interesting features. Our trust factors has to be seen. Okay, if I'll go and announce that I'm starting a school and I don't have a physical building, people would not believe in me. So the space or physical thinking or physical things has the trust factor as an innate nature for us. If you're going to marry someone and you do have a house, you have to showcase, that there has to be something which physically proven to tick out. So spatial trust is something really really matters, because we don't see, we don't believe, as simple as that. And this becomes the fastest way, because think of it, like when Shija might have started, when parents are coming, they would try to see, they cannot see the alumni now. They only can believe in her idea by a physical building, probably. That this is the kind of school she wanted to create, or
Yes.
anyone for that matter. So that spatial trust is that kind of factor to humans some way. Okay, and why this is going to be fastest way to the real world leaderships in today's time is because uh, like what Vinit and Shija answered for the agency question, I would say think about it from an observational lens. Okay, when I look at a spatial or or a space or a physical building or anything, what do I observe? What is that eventually make me feel as any object? Like we talk about human-centered design to life-centered design to anything. What does that make me feel? Can we make a context out of it? Can we make the intention out of that process? So if that is workable, and it is because it's a conscious decision, that would be shown differently. Whatever intent you're putting into a design would be reflected. Be assured of it. Or kids would make it to reflect something else eventually, but that's a reflection about a design in a physical format. when you talk about real world relationships or leaderships, are these spaces allowing you to really, really, really fail first? You know, uh, from that point of view, because if there is no scope for failures, there is no scope for growth. Or it says that you never lose. You either win or either learn. So the idea is, if you are in spaces, can you fail? Can teacher has that allowance to fail itself? Because when teachers burnout ratios are increasing every day. Think it from that viewpoint. So can teacher fail themselves? Can they wear the hat of a I would say researcher rather than a teacher? Because you expect a teacher to be right till the end of it. So if an adult is not allowed that kind of mental frame, how do you expect learners to have it? So is the whole community allowed to fail together on solving certain problems and figuring out a pathway from that? So real world leadership, we don't have a finite answer. Nobody has that answer. It is just that courage, confidence, that practical building on that spaces. So our spaces are allowed for that. Like observation. If you talk about where do we see that there are scribbling happening in the campus? Where do you think there is over usage happening? Where there is seats are sinking? Okay, so when you look at an observational lens, you'll able to see a lot of things, and that would eventually give you the pathway that this is what the community is looking like. That's the pathway they are making around. So that hardware has to have that software built up with that kind of intelligence,
Yeah, and yeah,
which is what I think would work around it. So
and
it is
I
like what kind of hardware you win, and what kind of software upgrade you would need. It will keep going around, and till the point you go to core to whatever you could talk in technology terms. So this is a parallels which you have to draw around. But Spatial becomes first because it can be seen, it can be believed in, and then you evolve to the level of problem solving or real world relevance you want to keep. So I always say, our the core line or the core thinking has to be as a designers is to bring the real world outside within the classrooms or within this campus. So if we can bring real world inside the campus, our job is done. All that
yeah.
simulation which can happen there.
And I think with space also, one of the things that I always feel is that it's always being continuously, it's in the process of making. People have this idea that space is like photography perfect, like a picture perfect space. But no, space is like constantly the paint is degrading, constantly the furniture is moving, constantly the walls are being, so it's always like uh, in making, in process. So it's like never complete as such.
Yes,
So
creativity is
that's, yeah,
chaotic.
yeah.
You if you don't have a chaos, you don't have creativity happening. Everything cannot fall in the place. So people, I don't know. We call it our schools in India majorly in terms of curriculum are designed on periods. One period to another period to another period. So we call them pizza models. You eat one slice after another. Versus our brain works in a noodle method. Everything is intertwined. You think about this, it goes somewhere else. So how do we really design our curriculum, or the whole idea of subjects? So why don't we have, let's say, one theme which is mapping to every subject, rather than having Hindi, English, math, science, or all of this in a packet format? Because our brain doesn't attune to that. So our biology is very different than the whole education has been designed in industrial age, and we are still taking the funneled out versions of that. So we might have to radically think about how humans are built to learn. Now that's a very innate, curious system inside us, and can we facilitate that in the whole paradigm of shift and change, or growth of the leadership? Because if we can do it human way, the way we really think about, that's the best way we can create an education or space for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I believe it's time for summing it up. So as Vinny told that no learning space is always finished. There is no like photo perfect learning space. So this digital space of learning also keeps evolving with every session that we have. So thanks to Vinny, thanks to Shrija ma'am, thanks to Yogi for being here and sharing so much of these insights for everyone who's joined this LinkedIn Live from all around the world: school owners, architects, designers, decision makers, policy makers. So thank you to all of you for joining this LinkedIn Live to celebrate the International Youth Day, and we will soon be back with more of them. I'm quite delighted, and I thank Sivom for giving me this opportunity to moderate this session. I'm Akshay Bajaj from GLSN. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vinit. Thank you, Shrija, for contributing to this.
Thank you.
And always great to connect people like you, who's very thought leader and taking that challenge in the hand as a practitioners. It's amazing to have those conversations. So thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Yeah.